He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me.' For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known."
Good morning. Ooh, that would have been bad. Good recovery, though. He's up. The Russian judge gave you a 9.8. We are embarking this morning on quite the endeavor, a study through the entire Gospel of John. Over the last 10 years since I've been the lead pastor here, we've poured through the lengthy Gospel of Matthew, and we've also poured through the lengthy Gospel of Luke. And I have also personally taught through Mark many times, not from the pulpit necessarily, but in many studies and classes. But I have never actually taught from cover to cover through the Gospel of John. I've taught many passages within that gospel, but never from start to finish. And when you read commentaries on the Gospel of John, and I can tell you I've read many, you hear words like maverick and enigma and riddle. John is so unique from the other three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which we typically refer to as the synoptic Gospels, meaning a general summary of Jesus' life. And there are almost countless differences between John's version and the other three. In the synoptic Gospels, Jesus' life is really centered around Galilee, where he was born and raised and grew up. But in John's story, that mostly takes place in the south, in Judea, and specifically in Jerusalem. Most of the stories in John's gospel are unique only to the Gospel of John, changing the water into wine, the many encounters with Nicodemus the Pharisee, the Samaritan at the well, and the subsequent ministry Jesus has with the Samaritan people, the paralytic at the pool of Siloam, the raising of Lazarus, the washing of the disciples' feet, his lengthy encounter with Pilate, and even his appearance to Mary Magdalene at the tomb are all unique to the Gospel of John. And key elements are also missing from the Gospel of John. There's no accounts of casting out demons in the Gospel of John, or healing lepers, or encounters with tax collectors or Sadducees. His birth, completely missing. The temptations, completely missing. The transfiguration, not there either. Even the Last Supper is missing from the Gospel of John. In the Gospels, Jesus speaks often in parables. In the Gospel of John, you barely hear a parable. Instead, what you get in John, unlike the synoptics, are these lengthy discourses of Jesus, like you find in John 14 through 17. The synoptics barely mention God as Father. In the book of Mark, it's only mentioned 4 times. In the Gospel of John, the Father's mentioned 130 times. And maybe the most significant difference is that the synoptics slowly unveil to us who Jesus is, beginning with his birth. But this is not what happens in John. John's identity to us is revealed in the first 18 verses in a way that only, I think, Colossians chapter 1 in Paul's version happens. And then after that revealing in the first 18 verses, John recapitulates the same thoughts and emotion and insights about Jesus over and over and over and over again through the remainder of the gospel. And that's what we're going to attempt to do in the remainder of our time this morning. John chapter 1, 1 through 18 is, in my very humble opinion, the greatest unveiling of Jesus in any place in the entire Bible other than, say, like I mentioned, Paul's version in Colossians 1, which we studied just a few months ago. And just very, very quickly, kind of the layout, John's gospel divides pretty evenly. There's a little intro, this first 18 verses, there's an epilogue in the end, and there's two massive sections in the middle. One we refer to as the book of signs, where Jesus performs 7 miracles or 7 signs. And then there's the book of passion, which really is Jesus kind of heading towards his death and resurrection. And within those two middle sections, John poetically reveals, in addition to the 7 signs, the 7 I ams, and we'll have plenty of time to get there. John even rounds out his purpose and why he wrote the gospel at the end of his gospel, which the other 3 writers do not do. John chapter 21. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may then have life in his name. John wants to reshape our belief, and in that reshaping, he actually wants you and I to discover what life is supposed to be about. So what I want to do is begin this morning by trying to reshape our thinking, to discover life, real life through the originator, Jesus. And I could easily make a complete series out of these 18 verses. I could go for months on these first 18 verses. In fact, when I kind of broke the passages down and was talking it through with Jeremy, man, he's like, dude, you are not going to attempt these first 18 verses in one sermon. I said, yes, I am. Not well, but I'll attempt it. And the reason is because I think everything that we will talk about this morning is actually restated in every single section after verse 18. And so I'll argue that we only need this morning to kind of do just an overview of those first 18 verses. And we'll let John unpack what the rest of the meaning is. So hopefully that makes sense to you. By what we will glance at this morning, though, we will have a great idea of where John is taking us for our thoughts and beliefs. And the very beginning itself screams to us what John is about. What are the first 3 words in the Gospel of John, chapter 1? Somebody shout it out. In the beginning. In the beginning. No decent Bible reader can ever read that phrase and not think of the creation in Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Whatever else John is going to tell us, he wants us to see this as the story of God and the world. But not just the story of, say, one man, Jesus, but rather the whole of the story of God culminating and centering around Jesus the Messiah. This book is about recreation, but this time it's about recreation of that which Jesus always intended when he did it the first time in Genesis. Colossians 1 has explained to us that Jesus is the one within the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, that actually generated the world. Jesus is the creator of the Godhead, of the 3. So, of course, in this new beginning, in this recreation, he is the one that will resolve its many issues because it is Jesus' masterpiece. In Genesis 1, the climax is the creation of human beings in God's image. But in John 1, the climax is the arrival of a human, the Word, capital W, the Word become flesh. Jesus is the solution, listen to this, according to John, to all of life. That is a massive statement. To say that one man will solve everything in life is beyond what my little noodle can take in. So what does John want us to know about this human that will do that? This morning, I want to spend 90% of our time on the first question, but the two questions I want to ask are, first of all, why is Jesus the solution to creation's calamity? And how does this reveal what humanity actually needs? And then second of all, how can we be connected to that solution? How do we actuate the solution that Jesus is providing? So let's spend most of our time in this first one. Why is Jesus the solution to creation's problems? And how does this reveal what our problems actually are? He's going to give us four answers, four massive answers in this first 18 verses of how and why Jesus solves life. The first one is this. Jesus, John refers to is the Word, capital W. John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him not anything was made that was made. I think this is super helpful to simply put Jesus' name in these verses because they read so strange with this word. Let me reread them in that way. John 1. In the beginning was Jesus, and Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. Jesus was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Jesus, and without Jesus was nothing made that was made. I think this reading kind of helps me grasp the gist of what John is saying. But the problem is we haven't dealt with the one awkward word that John used, the word word. He calls Jesus the Word. Why? Why is Jesus referred to by John as the Word? Let me give you two answers, though I know there are more, and John will unpack that as we go throughout this book, throughout the year. First of all, the Greek word is logos. Logos. It's where we get the word reason from, or logic. Logos means purpose. It means reason for life. It means an absolute truth, a meaning to things. This is what logos is. And this is interesting because John is saying there is a logos. There is a reason for life. There is a meaning behind life. This is both, to me, very similar and very, very foreign to us today because, quite frankly, the Western Hemisphere is now atheistic. Well over 50%. It's over 60% of our country, as an example, has no religious affiliation anymore. We are not a Christian nation anymore, just in case any of you are shocked by that. We are an atheistic nation with Christians also here as well. And this is very, very strange. This is thinking that John is introducing. Why? Why is it so foreign to say that there's a reason for life? Prominent atheist Richard Dawkins, for example, claims that human beings are just, and I quote, throwaway survival machines. Isn't that lovely? It just kind of warms the cockles, doesn't it? Whose only purpose is to survive and replicate genes. And Dawkins' answer is that life has absolutely no meaning other than, this is my favorite part, what you give it. So what Richard Dawkins is actually telling us, the expert on life, just make up your meaning, every one of you. That's the goal of life. How do you find the meaning? Just make it up. No wonder suicide and depression and anxiety are like a runaway freight train in our society. This was extremely foreign thought, this Dawkins kind of thinking in Jesus' day and in John's day. John is actually connecting to a major cultural debate at the time. Greek philosophy found its origins some 600 years before Jesus came on the scene with people like Socrates and Plato. And unlike atheism, Greek philosophers actually thought there was a reason behind the universe and not just some made-up one at an individual level. They actually believed, the Greek philosophers, and they believed it deeply, that there was a spiritual, cosmic principle woven into the very fabric of the universe, that the universe would actually guide us somehow. But The Greek philosophers thought it was a way of living, a way of thinking, which science and atheism actually do teach. This is where I find the similarity. They believe there's a logos behind the universe which we need to get behind. And they believed this for hundreds of years prior to Jesus coming on the scene. What if life has a logos, they conjectured, a meaning, a purpose? What if the universe actually had a meaning to life built into it somehow? And if we then aligned with this cosmic purpose, our life would actually work. And you had all these different schools of philosophy in Jesus' day. You had the Stoics, for example. The Stoics thought, look, the universe is already heading in its own direction. So we just got to give into it. We just have to accept everything that happens, even death, and just kind of flow, right? It's kind of the modern day pot smoking deal. Just kind of roll with life. And then you had the Epicureans. These were, Doug McBride would term them the early Americans. The Epicureans were like, hey, the universe is going to head a direction. The only way to get it to do what you want is to be selfish and get the gusto. Find what makes you happy and do it. Very, very American. Then John, the disciple, comes along, and he's this lightning rod of thought. And what does John say? John says, there is a logos. There is a reason for life, a true meaning, but it is a person, not a principle. John says, yes, there is a reason and a meaning and what we are created for, but it's actually a person, not an abstract idea or thought or lifestyle. It is beyond scientific answers. It is beyond cosmic truth, right? There is an order to life to be found in a person, John says. Brian, I've been under his tutelage for years now, and this whole idea of what atheism is and how atheism has become the pervasive thought of the time and how atheism is creeping into the church. And if you're not getting a steady input from Brian's Confessions of a Christian Atheist, you're making a mistake. And I've listened to Brian a lot, and I've listened to Brian talk a lot about the Big Bang, right? And the Big Bang is this idea of just total chaos, right? Which is fine, but the problem is the universe has order to it. The universe has absolute order to it. So how do you get order out of absolute chaos? It's the idea of the logos. It says the world is not chaos, but it is ordered and full of order. And we just need to figure out then how to align ourselves with the one that created the order. And if this is the case, then suddenly survival of the fittest is an absolute waste of time. You see, if this is the case, then love instead becomes very significant because the purpose behind life is personal. But see, without a person, where does this love and need for love come from? People agree on almost nothing. Do we all agree on that? Do we all agree on that? People agree on almost no level anymore whatsoever, except for one thing. And I think this is fascinating. Almost everybody agrees that we need love. This is not, by the way, atheistic thinking. So why does an atheistic country unanimously agree that we all need to be loved and to belong and to have connection? Why, for example, do babies that have deep physical and emotional and mental affection do so much better in life? They have proven this without a shadow of a doubt. A baby with proper affection addresses proper weight gain, stress reduction, better sleep, improved immune systems, mental health, physical health. Why? Because we have an author. We have a designer. We have a creator. We have a person, if you will, behind our design. We don't have a principle. not just an unattached science. And why then is this a solution to our life? Because we all need meaning and purpose and love. John is telling us Jesus is the Word. He is literally our meaning, John is saying. Jesus is the way to find purpose, a reason for living literally at all. That also means you cannot find meaning and purpose outside Jesus because you're just then making it up. That's a mind-blowing claim to me that John is making. That Jesus is the only one that can provide you the love and purpose that you need for your life. The second piece of this idea of the Word is that a person's word is really the clearest portrayal, I think, of who they are. When we speak, in a real sense, it is a part of us. It's your breath. It's your life that comes from inside of you. When people hear you, even if your words don't match your deeds, by the way, we remain responsible for what we say. It is assumed to be from us. Our words are assumed to represent us. Words carry life. They change how we live, what we think, what our outlook is, what our attitudes are. If I say the phrase, "I have a dream," you all are flooded with thoughts of what that might mean. If I say you're fired, or you're pregnant, or I love you, or I hate you, all of these things, they either give life or they take life away. Words carry and produce life. This is especially true of God. Listen to what Psalm 33:6 says. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all their hosts. Specifically by the breath of Jesus' mouth, since he's the creator. What Jesus says actually happens. So, John starts out by saying, Jesus is the Word. Jesus is the Logos. He is the purpose. He is the meaning behind all of life. And what Jesus says actually happens. Second of all, he says Jesus is the light. 7 times the term light shows up in this morning's passage. John 1:4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. John 1:9, the true light which enlightens everyone was coming into the world. John 1:5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. A better translation than overcome, or maybe an additional translation that some of you may have, is the world does not comprehend this light. Verses 4 and 5, Jesus is called the light of mankind that we all need. In verse 9, Jesus is called the true light. Now, why? Why is it important that John calls Jesus the light in addition to the Logos? How does this add to the fact that Jesus is the solution to all of life? I think the way to understand light, the only way to understand light, is to understand dark. What does the word dark mean first? And then we'll understand light. Darkness in the Bible, just like in our life, has a dual meaning. Darkness sometimes means evil and suffering. Like you may say, I'm going through a really dark time, or my friend is going through a very dark time. We all know what that is and what that feels like. But we can also mean, when we say dark, ignorance or lost, as in I'm in a dark room and there's no light and I can't find my way out. It has this dual meaning. So how does this dual meaning help us with understanding what light is? The world is filled with evil and suffering, and we don't know how to fix it. Amen? We are filled with evil and suffering, and we are often so impotent to resolve it. Just toss out some of the most basic issues in our country right now. How about immigration? How about abortion? How about student loans, dealing with China, helping the poor without enabling them? How about a super simple one, homelessness? There's only 60,000 homeless people in LA County right now. And I love it when we have these conversations, by the way, because we all have opinions on how to solve it. And at the end of the day, we all know we don't know how. We went, Matt Lyman and I, and Doug Abbott and I, and Vino. I don't know if Vino's in here, but the four of us drove for 18 hours to Colorado and New Mexico, and we hunted elk for a week. This is a couple weeks ago, and then we had an 18-hour drive back. And after 18 hours, you got to come up with some topics. And we got tired of unpacking COVID, by the way. That only took, 7 hours, Matt? And so we thought we'd turn to some lighter subjects. So we turned to abortion, and then we turned to immigration, and then we thought, let's solve homelessness. Now, as you all know, after 2-3 weeks we've been home, none of those have been solved. I know you're shocked by that because I assure you, Matt and Vino and Doug, brilliant people, super well read. We had some great ideas in that truck, and we literally solved nothing. How about the pandemic? Who would like to solve this? Or the biggest problem we cannot solve, death. I was watching TV the other day, and I was watching the news. The only part of the news I watch now is the weather. I love the weather because it's almost duck season. I'm 2 weeks away from the wind and the rain actually making a difference in my life. And it was interesting. Something really went bad. They reported the news on it. And then I love the comment. They said something like, "We are wishing you the best." Or then I watched a show with my wife right after that, and something awful took place. And they said in the dialogue, "We're sending you our thoughts." Not super helpful. We are so impotent to solve the real issues of life. Now, again, I'm not saying we're helpless. God has given us a mind and a body and his words to navigate by. We're not to become victims. But when it really all boils down, we are lost and impotent. I was at a dinner party about a year ago, and there were about 15 guys, and I brought all this wild game, and we were just doing this kind of dudes cookout thing. And I know all these guys, but it's not my circle. And there were several physicians in this group. And there was one physician and I that were sitting off to the side, and he's a specialist. In fact, some would say he's the best in this whole area at his particular specialty. And I won't mention his name because that would be terrible. And because he might be your doctor. And anyway, so I was talking to this particular physician, and he said to me this. Now, this is the greatest specialist we have in the whole Bay Area in this particular field. He said, "Doug, if people actually realized how little we know as doctors, it would scare the living hell out of them." Isn't that a frightening thought? And notice John equates light with life. To be life-giving. John 1:4. In him, in Jesus, was life, and the life was the light of men. We literally cannot create life, either literally or emotionally or psychologically. Again, because we're dark and we're impotent and we're lost and unable to fix it. We don't even know why things work. The human body is an absolute mystery. We know how it works. It was funny. Part of the conversations, Matt worked for Thoratech, these artificial heart valves, and he was explaining to us for like an hour how the heart works. But what's fascinating about that discussion was Matt, who has this expertise in the heart, has no idea why the heart works. None of us do. None of us know why the body works. We only know how. Do you remember that song, that lovely song in the mid-'80s? It goes something like this. I won't sing it because you'll all leave. We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones who make a brighter day. So let's start giving. There's a choice we're making. I love this. We're saving our own lives. It's true. We'll make a better day. Just you and me. What beautiful nonsense. Because we have no ability to solve evil and suffering. We have no ability to save ourselves. Just hold each other's hands and sing. And then what? Even when Jesus the light came, what happened? John 1:9. I got your gnat back, Kimberly. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world did not recognize him. And then he came to his own people, and his own people did not receive him. The world rejected him, and his own people, Israel, rejected him. We don't even recognize the light. When the light comes, we are so dark. And yet John says Jesus is the light that produces life. He enters our evil and our suffering, and he solves our problems. He is the Word. He is the purpose behind all of life, and he is the light. He solves our darkness. Third, Jesus is part of God, and Jesus explains God. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him. And without him was not anything made that was made. Listen to these phrases. In the beginning was the Word. Jesus always was, he's saying. Jesus was God, not a God. There is no article in the Greek. All things were made through him. Jesus wasn't created. Instead, he created everything. He's the generator. He's the Genesis. The Word, he says, was with God, meaning the Father. Only one God, yet within that God, there is a Trinity, a relationship with each other. At the heart of God is that he is a Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. We talk about this all the time in this church. This is the most important aspect of who God is. This is also the most important aspect then of who we are. Why? At the heart of God is a dynamic love relationship. They communicate. They adore. They enjoy each other. They connect with each other. The meaning of life is to love in relationship. Relationship, communication, connection. That's our thing. War, racism, divorce, grief, trauma, poverty, addiction, loss of love, loss of life. That's our darkness. We can't generate love. We cannot generate life because we're selfish and we're impotent. Yet we all know that's what we all need. And John comes along in his letter in 1 John and says this: God is love. Not God is loving, by the way, which is also true. He literally is that. It is not an adjective. It is his essence. John 1:18, no one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. Jesus makes God obvious. In this rare occasion, I love the King James Version because it's actually more accurate. No man hath seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father. That's the literal word. He hath declared him. See, this is the ancient idea when they used to sit around their table and dine and lean on their elbow and lay their head on the chest of the person next to them. Jesus has always been in the bosom of his Father. They are and always have been deeply, lovingly connected. And we are then generated out of that same DNA, if you will, needing love, needing intimacy. And that is what Jesus, as God, part of the Trinity's connection, offers you and I. That's why connecting and reconnecting to our author actually fixes our life, because it taps us into the only thing we actually really need. So Jesus is, again, the Word. He's our meaning. Jesus is the light. He's the answer for life's calamity and lostness. And Jesus is God within the relational Trinity. His essence is love, the very thing you and I need because we are birthed out of their essence. And Jesus can actually solve life's real issues because he's not impotent, because he is actually God. And finally, John says, and maybe this is the coup de grace, he was made flesh and dwelt among us. John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. And from his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. Just a couple things to point out. He says Jesus was made flesh and dwelt with you and I. That means Jesus became vulnerable. That means Jesus became even killable. And he gets you and I. Hebrews 4:15, for we do not have a high priest in Jesus who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who is in every aspect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Jesus gets trauma. Jesus gets loneliness. Jesus gets rejection and physical pain and the struggle to have faith. And Jesus gets death itself. And he goes on to say, we have seen his glory. This is such a huge Christian word that never makes sense to anybody, I don't think. To glorify God, or what's the glory of God? And we have defined this many times over this last year as simply seeing him accurately in all of his beauty and magnificence. When he became flesh, we saw, hear this, what God is really like. Jesus literally gave up his dignity to show you and I what he is like and how much he loves us. He gave up, hear this now, this should strike a chord, his freedom. He gave up his rights. He gave up his dignity for us. And that show, The Chosen, that you saw that short clip on that my wife and I are almost finished with, it's brilliant in my opinion, by the way, if you haven't seen it. Very biblically accurate. And the liberties that the writer takes are very fair and beautiful to watch. There's a scene where there's a gal that's going to join with the disciples and follow Jesus. And the dad comes along. He's very upset because his daughter's going to follow this weird rabbi all over, who knows where. And he wants to interview Jesus. And in this scene, it's so powerful because I'm watching this scene and I'm saying, okay, there's Jesus. He created that guy. And now Jesus is submitting to this older man and asking him things like, what can I help you with? How can I make you more comfortable knowing that your daughter's going to follow me? Because it's harder sometimes on the people that are left behind than even the people that come with me. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, dude, you made him. Like, if I made that guy, I'd say, hey, pipe down. Like, I made you out of mud, you little pimp. You're just a little pipsqueak. What are you bugging me for? And Jesus doesn't do that. He submits himself to this man. He gives up his own dignity. This is the Creator. He lives the lesser life of the created. This is to see God accurately. This is what Jesus and God is truly like. We saw this in verse 1, the Father and the Son totally enjoying each other in deep love. And in verse 18, Jesus is with the Father. The word is in the bosom of the Father. And yet Jesus allowed himself to be made flesh to dwell amongst us. God was willing to be pulled in two for you and I. Well, what do we do with that? How do we make this a part of our life? The rest of the Gospel of John is going to reveal that to us. We need to follow Jesus around for a while. But we'll glance at it this morning. John 1:10. Jesus was in the world and the world was made through him, and yet the world did not know him. He came to his own and his own people did not receive him. But, here it is, To all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God. We just sang this, didn't we? The right to become the children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. You see, we want love, but we want to be in charge. We want meaning, but we, for some reason, think we can make it up on our own. We want connection, but we push away the very one that generated us. We want purpose, but we think we're going to find it in a principle or in a course of action rather than in a person. Praise God, verse 12 says, but to all who receive him. I love that. Not to all who are intelligent, who have their act together, who don't make the same mistake over and over and over again, who can't seem to get their life in order. All the things that I think that the verse says, but it doesn't. It doesn't matter how lost you are or how dumb you are like me or how selfish. We need new life. We need to be prepared to start over. In that interview that I showed a month and a half ago of Jordan Peterson, he was being interviewed by this Canadian priest. And Jordan Peterson said this, Jesus is too terrifying a reality to believe. I don't know what would happen to you if you fully believed it. He went on in tears, and yet I know he is. And he didn't know how to just step across that line. But if we do receive him, if we do come to him, he'll give us the right. That's a strong word, to become his children. It's a legal term. It's an adoption term. It means intimacy. It means inheritance. It means permanence. Years ago, I don't think Jeremy is in here right now, but years ago, maybe 7 years ago, I'm guessing 8 years ago, I was so privileged to be invited to go to Walnut, where was it? It was in Benicia, Concord, somewhere in there, wherever the courthouse is, Martinez. And it was the actual adoption of Jeremy and Marissa's two youngest kids. They had 2 kids biologically, and then they were adopting these 2 kids. And it was such a hallowed place to sit in this courtroom with some other people. And it was the declaration of the adoption. And this female judge said to Jeremy and Marissa, oh, I was so moved by this. She said, they are now bone of your bone and blood of your blood. Wow. There's no difference, she said, between your biological children and these 2 children that I am basically legally giving to you. They changed their names. They got new birth certificates. Not infants, by the way, right, Wayne? See, it is even more than a legal process. It is truly a change of identity and status and essence. This is what Jesus is giving you and I. A new name, belonging to a new family, and we are truly changed to the very core of who we are. Amen? The old is truly gone. The new has absolutely come. We are children of the living God, Jesus Christ. Life is only found in Christ. I hope you heard that. Every day, we have to fight all these things that are, by the way, important, and their importance is about this high. And I mean things that are going to rankle you, like the vaccine, and vaccine cards, and who's the president. You know how high those things are? And I'm not saying they're not unimportant. They're this important. There's a priority that we're missing, and it's the kingdom of Jesus Christ. What do you think will give you life this morning? Is it a principle? Is it a cause? Is it a belief? Is it something somebody's taking away from you? Or is it Jesus? That's what John wants us to wrestle with every minute of every day until we see him face to face. Let's pray.